Hello there, welcome back to the channel. During the Dominion War, the Federation was getting desperate. Similar to the Allies during the Second World War, they began to scramble for anything to try and give them a hope in hell of winning that conflict. And that was not an easy thing to do. The Dominion was well organized, the Cardassians were not exactly a pushover. The Dominion, as a group, were ruthless and efficient adversaries, with one of the most professional, disciplined, and well-equipped armies in the galaxy, never mind the quadrant. Perhaps the only thing that really saved the Federation was actually managing to close down access to reinforcement from the Gamma Quadrant. But in their desperation, Starfleet came up with a few ingenious, and you could even say cost-saving measures to help them win the war, one of which was the Centaur type starship. Note I said type because we don't actually know it was called a Centaur class. Now in Apocrypha, Out of Universe, it's known as a Centaur class, but only because the USS Centaur was the first of its class encountered by the crew of Deep Space Nine in universe. But that's like saying, well, the first Galaxy class ship we encountered was the USS Enterprise, but we know that's a Galaxy class starship. The actual first of the line was the USS Galaxy. We don't know that the Centaur was the first of its class. And usually the first ship commissioned lends its name to the class, or at least the prototype. That's tradition, naval tradition from Earth. But let's get past that because we don't really know what it's called, so it's the Centaur type. What do we know about this Frankensteinian little starship? As I said, the Federation was getting desperate. Starfleet was cobbling together all kinds of monstrosities. For example, the Jaeger class. They recommissioned many older types of vessels that were scheduled for decommissioning, were perhaps mothballed in reserve, training vessels, all to plug the gaps created by the more powerful ships of the line having to be sent off. Ships that would either normally be doing little more than training cadets were now back on semi-frontline service, either taking over exploratory duties, first contact and diplomatic missions, or even in some cases taking up escort duty, or perhaps even reinforcing in the forms of, say, Miranda-class ships becoming frigates to escort more powerful, more modern starships to at least give the more powerful ships a fighting chance to destroy the enemy. We saw how well this worked, but quite frankly, getting desperate times, desperate measures. Another thing are the breakers yards. Now, of course, many of these derelict starships would not be capable of being recommissioned, but what you can do is strip them down faster, accelerate the process of recycling the components, or perhaps go, well, we've sifted through these 50 ships and discovered that 22 of them could be brought back online if we cannibalize the components from all these other ships and, bring over just a few new components to bring them online, like a few new weapons, a new warp core here and there, maybe a new computer core. But maybe 1 in every 10 derelicts in the scrapyard could be brought back into service, either to be used as transports, scout vessels, survey ships, or science vessels to be utilized in the background to keep a sense of normality and do that other work that the Federation needed to do that was more essential than we want to give it credit for, while the main ships did the fighting. Now we know things like the Sovereign class USS Enterprise was also kept back, but this is probably because other assets were still in play across the galaxy, and the Federation was a big entity. It's got other things to worry about than just the Dominion. So that brings us to the Centaur type. What exactly is the Centaur type starship? When we first encounter one of these vessels, it's operating on its own, patrolling near to Dominion space. It spots a Jem'Hadar attack ship and goes on the attack instantly, very aggressively. This ship is under the command of Captain Charlie Reynolds, an acquaintance at least of Captain Benjamin Sisko, known to be a resourceful and capable commanding officer. So this isn't a ship that Starfleet thought we're not just going to put newly commissioned captains onto. This is a vessel they have enough faith in to give to one of their more gifted and capable commanding officers. So they've got some faith in this design. But why? Why do they have faith in this design? Well, we see this ship go toe-to-toe with a Jem'Hadar attack ship. And it holds its own. Now, it does retreat when 3 more ships turn up, but quite frankly, Of course it did. A Galaxy-class vessel struggled with 3 attack ships. This isn't a Galaxy-class ship. But what is it exactly? Now, in terms of pure capability, it has standard Federation tech as far as we can tell. There's no visible deflector dish. We'll get to that. In terms of capabilities, we don't know much about the internal layout other than the fact of what we're going to get to in the next little bit. But we know it has shields for defense. It will have a tractor beam. It'll have transporters, replicators, other familiar technology. From what era they're from is a bit debatable, because again, this is a bit of a Frankensteinian vessel. It's armed with phasers and photon torpedoes. Exactly how many, we're not sure. It may have been upgunned. It may have newer weapons, but fewer of them. It's not exactly clear. Based on the coloration of the weapons that it was firing, they were of a modern standard, but that doesn't mean that they were ultra-modern. So how was this vessel birthed into reality? Basically, Starfleet was getting desperate, looking at all these mothballed parts of ships they had lying around in the fleet yards, either waiting to be built or whatever. They needed to get these things out faster. The Centaur type is actually a combination of different parts of other starships, principally Miranda-class vessels and Excelsior-class vessels. We know that more Centaur-type vessels were constructed. It wasn't just the USS Centaur, so they considered this a successful design. This implies they either had a lot of decommissioned or disabled during the conflict, perhaps, or vessels that were in scrapyards, parts of Mirandas and Excelsiors that were like, well, it's not worth bringing the original ship back online, the hull is too badly destroyed, but we'll take the engines from this, we'll take the saucer from this, we'll plug them together. That's in brief basically what they did, and we get a new ship out of it. Based on the fact that the principal amount of the hull is that of a Miranda class, we can assume that this ship is between 250 and 300 meters in length, with a probably similar internal volume to a Miranda class. It'll have the Miranda. It has basically the Miranda's main saucer section and the nacelles and pylons from an Excelsior class with a small weapons pod that's also probably either from a Soyuz or Miranda class or some other Miranda class variant. This seems to be its standard configuration, and it was used as a patrol vessel and escort ship. It didn't usually get sent into frontline activity, probably because of the incompatibility of the technologies. Miranda-class ships are much older in basic design than Excelsior-class, so assuming they were using older ships, you're trying to fuse together technologies from very different eras. It's also not clear, although I believe that they did, I know they did in other divergent timelines like Star Trek Online, actually begin to build these ships as standard fare. In fact, the ship I use on Star Trek Online when I do play it, which is quite rare to be fair, is a Centaur-type vessel. And I actually like the design a lot. I really like this idea of taking broken down components, disabled bits, and realizing, well, we can't repair the original. We can't get this back online, but we can use this, this, and this, and make something new out of it. It might not be to standard fleet standard. It might not be up to scratch, a bit like, the T-34s used by the Russians. Maybe this isn't to the quality standard we're used to, but it'll do. Now, I would assume that in universe, because the ship was quite successful, and this is an assumption, not fact, that these ships probably went into some form of standardized production with a more modern design. The basic hull profile and shaping of the ship is very similar and in keeping with a lot of existing Starfleet designs. Most notably in the 24th century, it's very similar in basic hull profile to an Akira-class starship. Even though you're taking components from 2 other ships, it ends up looking a lot more like, in my opinion, a lot more like an Akira class, which is a torpedo boat ship, but this vessel is going to geared towards patrol, and after the war, very likely search and rescue and other such missions. This ship was designed, though, for battle, even though it was built out of components that weren't necessarily originally made for that task. That's why I think it got the upgrade. It was definitely able to hold its own against the Jem'Hadar, whereas we saw Miranda class couldn't. But we assume, because of the warp nacelles, they would have had to take a warp core from an Excelsior, a much bigger core than a vessel of that size would necessarily need. Therefore, the ship will have been a bit overpowered. It will have extra energy for its shields and weapon systems, and with just a few tweaks and modifications, you could get a very powerful little ship out of that. And that is a Centaur type, an ingenious and resourceful use of broken technologies that very likely led into an entirely new classification of vessel to be used in the latter half of the 24th century. We do see others of this class pop up on named versions here and there. So we know that it was definitely made at least in limited numbers, and I would like to think, mostly because I like the design and I know that Starfleet's not completely stupid, that a ship this simplistic and easy to build, with a few modernizations to bring the class up to late 24th century standards, could have served the Federation as a quick, easy build ship after the disasters of the Dominion War, not to mention the decimation, minimally, of the Utopia Planitia shipyards plus the construction facilities on Mars. Building ships like this, a no-brainer. You'd be able to replenish your losses very quickly and easily. But as I said, that is a Centaur type vessel utilized by Starfleet in the late 24th century, first seen engaging with the Jem'Hadar, although unknowingly they're actually engaging with Starfleet officers, but they didn't know that. We don't blame them. And that is the end of this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts on the Centaur type vessel and Starfleet's desperate actions and to create such vessels like the Jaeger class, like the Centaur, which were just Frankenstein of starships created out of sheer desperation. But they worked. So yay or nay?
Very quick update to this video that I noticed when I finished editing it. Just for clarification, the Centaur type had the engines, the nacelle pylons and the saucer of an Excelsior. It was the weapons pod underslung under the ship, which was from the Miranda. And although it's possible other hybrids existed that did utilize more components from the Miranda, which I'm sure this one did, as we know that it didn't have a main deflector dish, which is very in keeping with Miranda designs, and it would have likely been using secondary deflectors, which the Excelsior saucer section probably came with. Yeah, I know that in the video I think I mentioned it had the Miranda class saucer and the Excelsior's engines. That's not accurate. That was me goofing up. So sorry. There's slight correction to the video. I filmed this days ago from before I edited it, so I couldn't really easily go back and refilm it. But yeah, slight goof. Apologies.